Welcome to Infinite Business Dynamics. Today let's look at some of the most common Scrum role traps on the PMP exam. These misconceptions appear frequently, and understanding the correct Scrum mindset can help you eliminate wrong answer choices quickly. The first trap is believing that the Scrum Master is the team's manager. That is incorrect. The Scrum Master is a servant leader who coaches, facilitates, removes impediments, and helps the Scrum team become more effective. The Scrum Master does not manage people, assign work, or exercise formal authority over developers. Whenever an exam question suggests that the Scrum Master directs the team's daily work, or acts like a traditional manager, that answer is almost certainly wrong. Remember this simple rule: Scrum Master equals enabler, not manager. The second trap is believing that the product owner is the customer. This is also incorrect. The product owner is a single individual who represents customers and stakeholders. Their responsibility is to maximize product value by managing and prioritizing the product backlog. The product owner represents customer interests but is not the customer. If an exam question directly equates the product owner with a customer, it is testing this misconception. Think of the product owner as the value maximizer. The third trap is believing that the project manager, Scrum Master, or product owner assigns tasks to developers. That is not how Scrum works. Developers are self-managing. They decide among themselves who will perform each task, and how the work will be completed during the sprint. If an exam option says that someone outside the developers assigns work or delegates tasks, eliminate that choice. Remember this principle.
Now let's look at another set of Scrum
assignments.
traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions test whether you truly understand Scrum Authority and team structure, not just the terminology. The first trap is believing that the Scrum Master assigns work to the team. This is incorrect. The Scrum Master does not assign tasks. Instead, they foster self-management by coaching the team, facilitating Scrum events, and removing impediments. The developers decide among themselves who does what. If an exam question suggests that the Scrum Master distributes work or directs daily activities, that answer is almost certainly wrong. Remember this: the Scrum Master never assigns work. The second trap is believing that the product owner assigns tasks. This is another common misconception. The product owner decides what should be built by ordering the product backlog to maximize value. However, the product owner does not decide who will do the work or how it will be completed. If an exam option shows the product owner assigning tasks to individual developers, eliminate that choice. A simple way to remember this is: the product owner decides what, not who or how. The third trap is believing that Scrum has a team lead. It does not. Scrum has no internal hierarchy among developers. There is no team lead, lead developer, or supervisor directing the rest of the team. Developers work collaboratively as equals and organize their own work. If an exam question introduces a team lead with authority over other developers, it is testing a traditional management mindset rather than Scrum. Remember this key principle: no hierarchy within the Scrum team. For the PMP exam, keep these three ideas firmly in mind. The Scrum Master enables rather than assigns, the product owner prioritizes value rather than delegating tasks, and Scrum teams operate without internal hierarchy. Mastering these distinctions will help you recognize and eliminate many common Agile exam traps.
Now let's look at another set of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on ownership, accountability, and who has authority over Scrum Artifacts. The first trap is believing that the functional manager directs sprint work. This is incorrect. In Scrum, the functional manager does not control the developers' daily work or direct sprint execution. Managers may provide organizational support, resources, or career guidance, but they do not tell the Scrum team how to perform sprint work. If an exam scenario shows a functional manager assigning sprint tasks or managing daily sprint activities, that answer is almost certainly incorrect. Remember this simple rule: managers support, they do not direct. The second trap is believing that the product backlog belongs to the entire Scrum team. This is a common misconception. The product backlog belongs solely to the product owner. Although developers and stakeholders can suggest ideas, provide feedback, and recommend changes, the product owner has the final accountability for the product backlog, including its content, ordering and prioritization. If an exam question says the entire team has final ownership or decision-making authority over the product backlog, recognize it as an exam trap. Remember this: the product owner owns the product backlog. The third trap is believing that the sprint backlog belongs to the product owner. That is also incorrect. The sprint backlog belongs to the developers. During sprint planning, the developers select product backlog items, create the sprint plan, and manage the sprint backlog throughout the sprint. As they learn more about the work, they update the sprint backlog themselves. The product owner may clarify requirements and answer questions, but does not own or control the sprint backlog. If an exam option suggests that the product owner modifies the sprint backlog, or is accountable for sprint execution, eliminate that choice. Remember this principle: developers own the sprint backlog. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 ownership rules. Functional managers support but do not direct sprint work. The product owner owns the product backlog, and the developers own the sprint backlog. Understanding these distinctions will help you eliminate many misleading Scrum questions with confidence.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on implementation authority, coaching, and quality ownership. The first trap is believing that the Scrum Master can force Scrum on the team. This is incorrect. A Scrum Master cannot force Scrum practices or dictate behavior. Scrum is adopted through coaching, facilitation, and continuous improvement. The Scrum Master helps the team understand Scrum, but they do not impose it through authority. If an exam scenario shows the Scrum Master forcing team members to follow Scrum or commanding how they should work, that answer is most likely incorrect. Remember this simple rule: the Scrum Master enables, never forces. The second trap is believing that the product owner dictates how the work should be implemented. This is another common misconception. The product owner decides what should be built and why it delivers value. However, the developers decide how the work is designed, developed, and implemented. Technical decisions belong to the self-managing developers. If an exam option shows the product owner directing technical solutions, architecture, or implementation details, eliminate that choice. Remember this principle: the product owner decides what, the developers decide how. The third trap is believing that quality is the tester's job. That is not how Scrum works. Quality is the responsibility of the entire Scrum team. Every developer is accountable for building quality into the product from the very beginning. Testing is important, but quality cannot be inspected in at the end. It must be built into every product increment. If an exam question assigns quality ownership only to testers or a separate QA role, reject that answer. Remember this simple rule: everyone owns quality. For the PMP exam, keep these 3 principles in mind. The Scrum Master coaches instead of forcing. The product owner defines what while the developers determine how, and quality is everyone's responsibility. Mastering these concepts will help you avoid many common Scrum implementation and quality traps on the exam.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on team composition, developer roles, and performance management. The first trap is believing that developers are only programmers. This is incorrect. In Scrum, the term developers refers to everyone who contributes to creating the product increment. Depending on the product and organization, developers may include programmers, testers, designers, business analysts, architects, UX specialists, database engineers, or any other professionals needed to deliver value. If an exam question limits the term developers to software programmers only, that answer is incorrect. Remember this simple rule: developers are everyone building the product increment. The second trap is believing that the business analyst is a role separate from the developers. This is another common misconception. Scrum defines only 3 accountabilities: the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the developers. If business analysis work is needed, it is performed by one or more developers. A business analyst may serve as a developer within the Scrum team, rather than as a separate Scrum role. If an exam option presents the business analyst as an external role outside the Scrum team, eliminate that choice. Remember this principle: a business analyst can be a developer. The third trap is believing that the Scrum Master evaluates team performance. That is also incorrect. The Scrum Master coaches the team, facilitates Scrum events, and helps remove impediments. They do not conduct formal employee evaluations or manage individual performance reviews. Performance management belongs to the organization's management system, not to Scrum. If an exam question shows the Scrum Master rating employees, conducting performance appraisals, or deciding promotions, reject that answer. Remember this simple rule. The Scrum Master is a coach, not an evaluator. For the PMP exam, keep these 3 principles in mind. Developers include everyone who builds the product increment. A business analyst can be part of the developers, and the Scrum Master coaches the team, rather than evaluating employee performance. Understanding these distinctions will help you eliminate many common Scrum team and performance traps on the exam.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on people management responsibilities and sprint goal stability. The first trap is believing that the product owner approves team leave. This is incorrect. The product owner is responsible for maximizing product value, managing the product backlog, and representing stakeholder interests. They are not responsible for approving vacations, leave requests, or other HR matters. Those responsibilities belong to the organization's people management structure, not to Scrum. If an exam question shows the product owner acting as an HR manager or approving employee leave, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule. The product owner focuses on value, not hour. The second trap is believing that the Scrum Master approves leave. This is another common misconception. The Scrum Master facilitates Scrum, coaches the team, and helps remove impediments. They do not manage personnel, approve paid time off, or perform administrative staffing duties. These responsibilities exist outside the Scrum framework. If an exam option presents the Scrum Master approving leave requests or acting as a line manager, reject that answer. Remember this principle. The Scrum Master manages the process, not people. The third trap is believing that the product owner can change the sprint goal during the sprint. That is also incorrect. The sprint goal provides focus and stability throughout the sprint. Once the sprint begins, the sprint goal remains fixed. While the developers may adapt the sprint backlog as they learn more, the sprint goal is not changed simply because new work appears. If the sprint goal becomes obsolete and can no longer be achieved, the product owner has the authority to cancel the sprint. However, the product owner cannot simply modify the sprint goal halfway through the sprint. If an exam question suggests changing the sprint goal to accommodate new requirements, reject that answer. Remember this simple rule. The sprint goal stays fixed throughout the sprint. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 principles. The product owner is accountable for product value, not HR decisions. The Scrum Master facilitates Scrum rather than managing personnel, and the sprint goal provides stability throughout the sprint. Mastering these distinctions will help you avoid many common Scrum governance and sprint management traps on the exam.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on sprint scope, the true role of the Scrum Master, and product owner accountability. The first trap is believing that the product owner can add work during an active sprint. This is incorrect. Once a sprint begins, the sprint scope is protected. The product owner cannot simply inject new product backlog items into the current sprint. If new work is identified, it is normally added to the product backlog and considered for a future sprint. If an exam question shows the product owner adding new work directly into an active sprint, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule. No mid-sprint scope changes. The second trap is believing that the Scrum Master is the team's secretary. This is another common misconception. The Scrum Master is a servant leader who facilitates Scrum events, coaches the team, removes impediments, and helps the organization adopt Scrum. Scheduling meetings or taking notes may happen occasionally, but these administrative tasks do not define the Scrum Master's role. If an exam option presents the Scrum Master as someone whose primary responsibility is scheduling meetings or performing clerical work, reject that answer. Remember this principle: the Scrum Master is a leader, not a secretary. The third trap is believing that the product owner is a committee. That is also incorrect. Scrum defines the product owner as exactly one person. While the product owner may receive advice from stakeholders, subject matter experts, or governance groups, final decisions about the product backlog belong to a single accountable product owner. If an exam question suggests that a committee, steering group, or multiple people collectively share the product owner role, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule: the product owner is one person. For the PMP exam, keep these 3 principles in mind. Sprint scope is protected during the sprint. The Scrum Master is a servant leader rather than an administrative assistant, and the product owner is a single accountable individual. Understanding these distinctions will help you avoid many common Scrum scope and role traps on the exam.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on Scrum role accountability, the absence of a project manager role, and product backlog prioritization. The first trap is believing that a Scrum team can have multiple Scrum Masters. This is incorrect. Every Scrum team has exactly one Scrum Master. That one person is accountable for establishing Scrum, coaching the team, and helping everyone understand and apply Scrum effectively. While others may assist, the Scrum Master accountability cannot be shared or divided. If an exam question suggests that several people jointly serve as the Scrum Master for the same Scrum team, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule: one Scrum Master per Scrum team. The second trap is believing that Scrum includes a project manager role. This is another common misconception. Scrum defines only 3 accountabilities: the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the developers. There is no project manager role in the Scrum framework. Responsibilities traditionally handled by a project manager are distributed among these 3 Scrum accountabilities. If an exam option places a project manager inside the Scrum team or gives them authority over Scrum execution, reject that answer. Remember this principle: there is no project manager role in Scrum. The third trap is believing that the Scrum Master prioritizes the product backlog. That is also incorrect. Prioritizing and ordering the product backlog is the exclusive responsibility of the product owner. The Scrum Master facilitates discussions, coaches the team, and helps everyone follow Scrum practices, but does not decide backlog priorities. If an exam question shows the Scrum Master changing priorities, reordering backlog items, or overriding the product owner's decisions, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule: the product owner prioritizes the product backlog. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 principles. Each Scrum team has one Scrum Master. Scrum does not include a project manager role, and only the product owner is accountable for product backlog prioritization. Mastering these distinctions will help you recognize and eliminate many common Scrum role and accountability traps on the exam. Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on product backlog prioritization and effort estimation. The first trap is believing that developers prioritize the product backlog. This is incorrect. The product owner is solely responsible for prioritizing and ordering the product backlog. Developers contribute technical expertise, estimates, and implementation advice, but they do not decide which product backlog items come first. Prioritization is based on value, business goals, and stakeholder needs, and that accountability belongs to the product owner. If an exam question shows developers independently reordering or prioritizing the product backlog based on technical preferences, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule: the product owner prioritizes the product backlog. The second trap is believing that the Scrum Master estimates the work. This is another common misconception. The Scrum Master facilitates the estimation process but does not estimate the work. Effort estimates, story points, and task estimates are created by the developers because they are the people responsible for building the product increment. If an exam option shows the Scrum Master assigning story points, estimating effort, or determining task duration, reject that answer. Remember this principle: developers estimate the work. The third trap is believing that the product owner estimates the work. That is also incorrect. The product owner defines what needs to be built and clarifies business requirements, but only the developers estimate the effort required to complete the work. Since they are responsible for implementation, they are also responsible for estimating complexity, effort, and duration. If an exam question suggests that the product owner sets story points, overrides the developer's estimates, or determines how long implementation should take, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule. Only the developers estimate the work. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 principles. The product owner prioritizes the product backlog, the Scrum Master facilitates estimation but never estimates, and only the developers are responsible for estimating effort. Understanding these distinctions will help you avoid many common Scrum prioritization and estimation traps on the exam.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on the definition of done, implementation authority, and the true role of the Scrum Master. The first trap is believing that the Scrum Master owns the definition of done. This is incorrect. The definition of done is a shared commitment to quality that belongs to the entire Scrum team. It defines the quality standards that every product increment must satisfy before it can be considered complete. The Scrum Master helps the team understand and improve the definition of done, but does not create, own, or control it alone. If an exam question shows the Scrum Master independently defining, changing, or enforcing the definition of done, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule: the Scrum team owns the definition of done. The second trap is believing that the product owner decides how the product should be built. This is another common misconception. The product owner decides what should be built by defining and prioritizing product requirements. The developers decide how the work is implemented. Technical decisions such as architecture, design, coding practices, testing approaches, and engineering methods belong to the self-managing developers. If an exam option shows the product owner directing technical design or implementation decisions, reject that answer. Remember this principle: the product owner decides what, the developers decide how. The third trap is believing that the Scrum Master is a project manager. That is also incorrect. The Scrum Master is a servant leader who coaches the team, facilitates Scrum events, removes impediments, and helps the organization improve its use of Scrum. Unlike a traditional project manager, the Scrum Master does not assign tasks, direct team members, manage resources, or exercise formal authority over the developers. If an exam question presents the Scrum Master as a manager with direct control over the team's work, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule: the Scrum Master is not a project manager. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 principles. The Scrum team collectively owns the definition of done, the product owner defines what while the developers determine how, and the Scrum Master leads through coaching rather than traditional project management. Mastering these distinctions will help you recognize and eliminate many common Scrum role and quality traps on the exam. Let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on Scrum team size, self-management, and product owner delegation. The first trap is believing that a Scrum team can have more than 10 developers. This is incorrect. The Scrum Guide recommends keeping the developers to 10 or fewer. Smaller teams communicate more effectively, make decisions faster, and remain highly adaptable. As teams become larger, communication overhead increases and agility decreases. If an exam question suggests that a very large Scrum team is just as effective without restructuring, be cautious. That is usually an exam trap. Remember this simple rule: keep the Scrum team to 10 or fewer developers. The second trap is believing that the Scrum Master shields the team from every problem. This is another common misconception. The Scrum Master removes significant impediments that prevent the team from delivering value. But the developers are self-managing and should solve everyday technical and operational issues themselves. The goal is to build an empowered team, not one that depends on the Scrum Master for every decision. If an exam option shows the Scrum Master handling every conflict, solving every problem, or acting as a permanent buffer between the team and the organization, reject that answer. Remember this principle: the team solves its own problems. The Scrum Master escalates true impediments. The third trap is believing that the product owner must personally write every user story. That is also incorrect. The product owner is accountable for the product backlog, but accountability does not mean doing every task personally. The product owner may delegate the writing or refinement of user stories to developers, business analysts, or other team members, while remaining fully accountable for the backlog's content, ordering, and value. If an exam question insists that the product owner must personally write every user story, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule: the product owner can delegate writing, but never accountability. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 principles. Scrum teams remain effective with 10 or fewer developers. Self-managing teams solve their own day-to-day problems, while the Scrum Master removes major impediments, and the product owner may delegate backlog writing while retaining full accountability. Mastering these distinctions will help you avoid many common Scrum team structure and delegation traps on the exam.
Now let's look at another group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on leadership, people management, and the skills required in Scrum. The first trap is believing that the product owner manages people. This is incorrect. The product owner is accountable for maximizing product value by managing and ordering the product backlog. They do not hire people, conduct performance reviews, approve leave, resolve personnel disputes, or perform HR responsibilities. Those responsibilities belong to the organization's management structure, not to Scrum. If an exam question presents the product owner as a people manager or HR manager, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule: the product owner manages value, not people. The second trap is believing that traditional project management skills are useless in Scrum. This is another common misconception. Scrum does not eliminate project management skills. Planning, communication, stakeholder engagement, risk management, forecasting, and coordination are still essential. The difference is that these responsibilities are distributed across the Scrum team instead of being owned by a single project manager. If an exam option claims that planning, scheduling, or risk management skills disappear in Scrum, reject that answer. Remember this principle: project management skills are distributed, not eliminated. The third trap is believing that the Scrum Master is simply a servant. That is also incorrect. The Scrum Master is a servant leader. Serving the team is only one aspect of the role. The Scrum Master also provides leadership by coaching the team, facilitating Scrum events, removing impediments, promoting continuous improvement, and helping the organization adopt Scrum effectively. If an exam question portrays the Scrum Master as merely an administrator, note-taker, or someone without leadership responsibility, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule: the Scrum Master is a leader who serves. For the PMP exam, remember these three principles. The product owner manages product value rather than people. Project management skills remain valuable but are shared across the Scrum team, and the Scrum Master is a servant leader who coaches, enables, and leads rather than managing through formal authority. These distinctions will help you eliminate many common Scrum leadership and skills traps on the PMP exam. Now let's look at the final group of Scrum traps that frequently appear on the PMP exam. These questions focus on product release, self-management, and the true responsibility of the Scrum Master. The first trap is believing that the sprint review is a release gate. This is incorrect. The sprint review is an inspection and adaptation event. Its purpose is to inspect the product increment, gather stakeholder feedback, and adapt the product backlog. It is not an approval meeting for releasing the product. In Scrum, a product increment can be released whenever it provides value and meets the definition of done. A release does not have to wait until the sprint review. If an exam question says that a product increment can only be released after the sprint review, eliminate that option. Remember this simple rule: sprint review is for inspection, not release. The second trap is believing that all work must be assigned. This is another common misconception. Scrum teams are self-managing. The developers decide among themselves who will perform each product backlog item or task. Neither the Scrum Master, the product owner, nor a manager assigns daily work. If an exam option shows someone assigning tasks to individual developers, reject that answer. Remember this principle: developers self-assign work. The third trap is believing that the Scrum Master manages people. That is also incorrect. The Scrum Master is responsible for the Scrum process, not personnel management. The Scrum Master coaches the team, facilitates Scrum events, removes impediments, and helps everyone understand Scrum. They do not supervise employees, conduct performance reviews, approve promotions, or manage people's careers. If an exam question presents the Scrum Master as a people manager, eliminate that choice. Remember this simple rule: the Scrum Master manages the process, not people. For the PMP exam, remember these 3 principles. The sprint review is an inspection event rather than a release gate. Developers organize and assign their own work, and the Scrum Master manages the Scrum process, not the people. Master these distinctions, and you'll be well prepared to eliminate some of the most common Scrum traps on the PMP exam.
Now let's look at another important Scrum trap that frequently appears on the PMP exam. This one focuses on Scrum team structure and the absence of internal hierarchies. The trap is believing that a Scrum team has subteams. This is incorrect. Scrum does not recognize testing teams, development teams, architecture teams, business analysis teams, or any other internal subgroups. A Scrum team is one cross-functional self-managing unit, working toward a shared product goal and sprint goal. If an exam question introduces separate testing teams, analysis teams, or internal hierarchies within the Scrum team, that is a strong indication the answer is incorrect. Remember this simple rule: there are no subteams in Scrum. Now let's reinforce what a true Scrum team looks like. A Scrum team consists of only 3 accountabilities. First, the product owner. The product owner is accountable for maximizing product value by managing and ordering the product backlog. Second, the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is accountable for establishing Scrum, coaching the team, removing impediments, and helping everyone understand and apply Scrum effectively. Third, the developers. The developers are self-managing professionals responsible for creating a usable product increment every sprint. They organize their own work, collaborate across disciplines, and ensure the increment meets the definition of done. Notice what is missing. There are no team leads, no testing departments, no development departments, no architects managing developers, and no internal reporting hierarchy. Everyone works together as one cohesive Scrum team. For the PMP exam, remember this key principle: a Scrum team is flat, unified, cross-functional, and self-managing. It consists of one product owner, one Scrum Master, and the developers, working together as a single cohesive team with no internal subteams or hierarchy.
Beyond the PMP exam, Scrum Guide Precision. Congratulations! You've now mastered the 40 most common Scrum traps that appear in PMP exam questions. But before we wrap up, let's go one step further. These are not new rules. They're Scrum Guide refinements that advanced PMP candidates should understand. First, instead of saying the sprint goal is fixed, the Scrum Guide uses more precise language. It says the sprint goal should remain stable throughout the sprint. If the goal becomes obsolete, only the product owner has the authority to cancel the sprint. Second, you've learned that the product owner cannot add work during an active sprint. The Scrum Guide adds an important nuance: the product owner cannot unilaterally add work. Any changes to the sprint backlog require collaboration with the developers. Third, while we say the developers own the sprint backlog, remember that it isn't a static document. The sprint backlog is continuously updated and refined as the developers learn more during the sprint. Fourth, quality is not owned by one person or one role. The definition of done is a shared commitment of the Scrum team. It evolves with the product and may also include organizational quality standards. Finally, the term developers has a broader meaning than many people assume. Developers are not just programmers. Anyone committed to creating any aspect of a usable increment, including testers, analysts, designers, architects, UX specialists, and engineers, is considered a developer under the Scrum Guide. Remember, these points do not contradict the exam shortcuts you've learned throughout this lesson. They simply provide greater precision and align your understanding with the official Scrum Guide. Mastering both the PMP exam mindset and these Scrum Guide nuances will help you answer challenging scenario-based questions with confidence while strengthening your real-world Agile knowledge. Scrum Guide Precision, Leadership and Accountability. Let's continue with a few more Scrum Guide nuances related to leadership and accountability. These refinements won't change the answers to most PMP questions, but they will deepen your understanding and help you handle more challenging Agile scenarios. First, we often say that the Scrum Master cannot force Scrum. The Scrum Guide goes one step further. It says the Scrum Master cannot impose Scrum. Instead, they coach, facilitate, and help everyone understand and adopt Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. Their influence comes through leadership, not authority. Second, many learners think the Scrum Master's primary responsibility is simply removing impediments. While that's true, the Scrum Guide emphasizes that the Scrum Master also coaches developers toward greater self-management. Whenever possible, the team should solve problems themselves, with the Scrum Master enabling rather than taking over. Third, it's common to hear that the product owner represents the customer. The Scrum Guide uses more precise language. The product owner represents the needs of customers and stakeholders while remaining accountable for maximizing product value. In other words, they balance multiple perspectives to achieve the best business outcome. Fourth, quality is not the responsibility of a single role. The entire Scrum team shares responsibility for quality through the definition of done. Quality is built into every increment from the beginning. It is not something inspected after development is complete. Finally, Scrum teams are often described as having no hierarchy. The Scrum Guide explains this more precisely by stating that Scrum teams are self-managing with no internal hierarchy. Every member contributes according to their skills and collaborates as equals toward achieving the sprint goal. These refinements reinforce an important principle. Scrum is built on leadership, collaboration, shared accountability, and continuous improvement, not command and control. Understanding these nuances will not only strengthen your PMP exam performance but also help you apply Scrum effectively in real-world projects. Infinite business dynamics, where professionals don't just pass the PMP, they build the knowledge, mindset, and leadership to deliver lasting business value.